N-Corp might be the main threat of this chapter, but one of them is going to have more immediate concerns. As the Misfit League went back into the bus, a pouty Charon and the cold stare of Virgilius was waiting for them. Someone is clearly in deep. The oppressive atmosphere told everyone that he's not around. Charon telling them that they are late. She counted to 100 and they still didn't come. But Virgilius cautioned her. She had more icy words to say, but a glance from him was enough to get her to stop, implying that what she has to say is 2 miles compared to what he has in store for them. She told him that she would remember this. He offered to buy her something sweet later to make up for that. She sat back down without complaint, and then he slowly turned to them. It was time for them to go to Brown Alert, and they were fully aware of that. The others went back to their seats, knowing who his ire will be directed at. He then asked Don Quixote what her excuse was. She told him that she couldn't turn a blind eye to the weak being persecuted. Then he said, "No, wrong." Dante couldn't register what was happening quickly enough. It should have been impossible for them to miss what was going on, as they had no eyelids to blink with. Yet, when they were able to register what was going on, it was clear that Don Quixote was being given disciplinary action by Virgilius, who has clearly had enough of her antics, which took the form of Virgilius trampling Don Quixote under his shoe. Virgilius told her that he asked for an excuse, not a justification of her views. She was overcome by impotent anger. He noted that this wasn't the first time this has happened. She was responsible for 3 separate incidents already. Let's see, the first one was the pawn shop in District 10 when she defended that smarmy shopkeeper from the Ting Tang Gang thug. The second time was when she encouraged Dante to use the slot machine, wasting the wish power that they took from the Ting Tang Gang leader, after stealing their clothes. And not long ago was the third time when she broke the glass wall, putting the Nest immigration checkpoint into lockdown, and forcing him to interact with the spandex-clad Siegfried. Basically the Superman to his Batman. Much to his displeasure. Yes, that's 3 separate times when she's jeopardized their work with her deranged behavior. Well, he's not wrong about the deranged part. He then asked for what she thought about that. She responded by saying that while her own actions did inconvenience her colleagues, and then she was interrupted by increased pressure from his boots. Well, his foot anyway. And it was painful, but none dared to step in, as it was obvious that she was being punished for her actions. That and interrupting this wouldn't make the situation better, and to be honest with you, I'm amazed this didn't happen sooner. Virgilius told her that he was asking for her thoughts. Why did she not understand this? Don Quixote shouted at him that she was speaking only to be interrupted. Virgilius told her that what she should have done from the start was give an apology, along with an elaboration of how she plans to improve her conduct. Don Quixote was incensed by this, seeing it as unjust, as he's demanding a specific answer out of her. Virgilius then told her that a company has the correct answer for its employees. The questions are only asked to see if she gets it right. In that case, she's failing miserably by that logic. That she's solely mistaken if she believes that a company is sincerely curious about her inputs. Don Quixote told him that if a company insists so, then she... And before she could say more, I suspect that she was planning to resign, desert, or whatever you want to call it, because before she could say this, Virgilius was sick of what was going on, and, well, she proceeded to be kicked by Virgilius, who tossed her to the floor, and then gripped her full by the collar, and, speaking in a tone that would impress Batman in terms of his ability to... Yes, his ability to intimidate, he reminded her of what went down when she joined. This silenced her as he continued to tell her that he hopes that she hasn't forgotten the deal they struck that day. His eyes were glowing red during this, just to get the point across stronger. I suspect that all but Faust were in quite deep at the time Virgilius found them, and to get themselves out of whatever mess they were in. So, out of desperation, they joined Limbus Company, as it's implied that most of them didn't do this by choice. At least not a choice that was better than what they had at that time. As for running Limbus Company by fear, long term, I don't think it would work, as it would lead to lingering resentment and lead them to possibly stab Virgilius in the back when a better deal appears. And that's assuming that Stockholm Syndrome doesn't take in. And as far as using physical discipline is concerned, Lord Horatio Nelson, while he saw it as a necessity to maintain order during long voyages, he didn't approve of it, believing that it made the good bad and the bad worse. For all but Faust, they had nothing left to lose. Makes you think that if it turns out that Roger does want to rejoin the Eurodivier, she would do so once her wants replaced her needs. And she would do so at a point when she would have the advantage, and she was sure that she could get away with it. As for Don Quixote, it'd be likely that something made her lose her mind. The gaze of the intimidating colour fixer made her nod her head silently. He told her that was all, and to go back to her seat. Don Quixote usually exuded pride and confidence, quickly shifting into a discouraged, crestfallen state. It wasn't a pleasant sight. Dante questioned what kind of deal could have caused her to go silent. Virgilius then added the same goes for the rest of them, implying that he would do the same to them if they step out of line. A company isn't a platform for fulfilling egocentric dreams or preaching big ideas. If they still go against the terms of their contract, their employment contract, to be more precise, to act unprompted, they should consider the consequences before they do, as they'll spend a grueling period of being unable to escape, not through death, nor through struggles at severance. Gregor then noted something which does make sense and explains this behavior. It's because Virgilius got help from Zach Freeter. Yeah, Siegfried must have ruffled his feathers, and his patient had run out with Don Quixote, although it's unlikely as... well, she was a fangirl of Siegfried more so than him, and Don Quixote corrected him when he got the name wrong. Roger complained that the mission hadn't even started yet and they've already got a scolding, telling her to have some tact before she acts. Ishmael also knew this would happen eventually. They needed to be careful from now on. Roger and Ishmael looked at Heathcliff, much to his irritation, asking what they were looking at him for, asking if they're asking to get stoned, and not in the smoking weed kind of stoned. Virgilius silently looked at him, which made him back down, making it clear that he understands. Anger management issues or not, he does not want to provoke a colour fixer in a bad mood. There's also an irony that Virgilius prefers to be an independent fixer, yet he joined Limbus Company to find a way to restore the two that remained of the orphans that aren't dead. It's around 8 months so far, and he's lacking results. Although he had to recruit the damned dozen in all that time. Well, except Faust, as she was looking for him, and was already with Limbus Company. Now this made this especially painful, although he classes independent as one that doesn't commercialize their appearance. Let's just say that there are unlikely to be figurines of the Red Gaze for sale in any of the Winged souvenir shops. After that conflict was resolved, Mephistopheles departed for the next destination. A strange feeling was evoked in the passengers. Roger saw some people that looked like they've not a care in the world. Dante noticed that the roads there were way different from the ones that they've travelled along so far. Gregor noted that it was their first time travelling in the middle of a nest. Ishmael told them that there was a world of difference between the nests and the back streets. Each nest had its own cultural heritage, the nests being the nicer parts free from the syndicates, as long as the wing was intact, of course. The back streets being the ear parts, where if a fixer or fixer office isn't hired to protect you, you're at the mercy of organised crime. As for the flavour of each nest, or indeed each district, with District 10, J-Corp territory, it likely has an East Asian flavour to it. With N-Corp, the nest there is minimalist white and no colour, like quite a few places along the Mediterranean, but much duller. Virgilius then brought them to attention, telling them that their destination was the town of Kal. Yes, I probably butchered the pronunciation, but whatever you call it. The investigation reveals that a passage connected to the Lobotomy Corporation branch exists somewhere there. Now this provokes a reaction in Sinclair, and it wasn't a good one. He had a look of bowel-loosening terror. He was trembling as well. He also confirmed that a third party, N-Corp, had occupied the area surrounding the branch facility, which is why an additional recon operation was requested from clearance. Faust added to this by saying the preliminary observation unit 3 from the before team had been dispatched, This included Sardanefi. Virgilius said that they'd get a report from them once they got a good grasp of the situation. After that, they were driving down a quiet woodland path leading to their destination. The green trees were a comforting sight, more so than in the back streets that also had those trees. But then they were disturbed by something described as odd. Billowing smoke rising in the distance. Sinclair was anxiously questioning why smoke was coming from there, and Roger noticed this behavior. Virgilius told Charon to turn, noticing something troubling coming their way. She did so, but it wasn't fast enough, as trouble in this case was defined as a large nail that embedded itself in the back window. Heathcliff was especially irate at this, as it was a nail that was too close to him. Even though he knows that he wouldn't stay dead, he would still remember any pain from that death. Faust noted to reinforce the windows, as she didn't test them to see if they could withstand high-velocity projectiles. Wiltis realized that this was aimed directly at them, the faction that the Before team warned them about, those under N-Corp's employ. Charon complained at how Mephi got hurt. She was sad at that happening. Virgilius didn't think that they'd stop anytime soon, ordering the sinners off the bus to take care of the immediate problem. As they got off the bus, a group stood in the way, each clad in rusty armor and white coats, armed with a hammer and nail, which also had that as their crest, telling them that they may not use that road. Gregor told him that he should have said so in the first place, as what about their windshield? Ortius called the armor-clad man out on his rudeness, as he attacked without warning, as it's common courtesy to state your intentions. He announced them as Inquisitors, the nail that fixes the blasphemous and the hammer that strikes down the sinful. Great, there's some that are stuck in the Middle Ages. Ishmael recognized them as part of N-Corp, specifically the Nagel und Hammer, or as Faust would translate, the hammer and nail. Clearly the taboo hunters are the more stable of those under N-Corp's employ. As for the reason why they can't proceed is, well, it's because they're in the midst of cleansing heretical dissidents. Gregor then told the Inquisitor that they just wanted to pass through, not looking for any trouble, that this was a tour bus. Dante questioned this silently. That was the best that he could come up with? Although they and the others decided not to contradict that narrative. Gregor clearly wanted to prevent a disastrous first impression, so he was doing what he could to appease the medieval reenactors. Rodio was thinking that since that job at the mine under the casino, was he into acting? He denied this. Surprisingly, the Inquisitor was convinced. He offered a chance to prove themselves untainted. Gregor wanted to know what that was, so they can get on with their travels. Then the Inquisitor pointed in Dante's direction and told them to behead the blasphemous traveller, as they were being described as, much to Dante's surprise, along with kneeling before their hammer as they consecrate their head to them, which will prove that they are untainted and their journey shall continue without any further hindrance. Although they will have to pass with the defiled vehicle as well. Well, it was worth a try. Heathcliff knew that this wasn't going to work, so he chewed them out, saying that they love to spew on, asking if they're daft enough to do as they say. Dante was hesitant to break with this, saying that he didn't have to, but Heathcliff ignored them, continuing on asking those twits who they were to tell him to kneel. Well, I honestly can't see that happening, as they're not General Zod, and they're definitely not Virgilius. He's the one that could make him do that, while also making him feel the need to change his underwear. The Inquisitor nodded, understanding what that meant. He declared all of them as heretics, and the Inquisitors proceeded to attack the sinners. After shoving the nails right up the Inquisitors' they went back into the bus, with Virgilius casually greeting them with a lifted hand, asking if they were a little trickier than their usual foes. Roger complained that it could have gone a lot faster if he lent a hand. Again, he told her that there wouldn't be any point to their journey if he helped them. Ishmael remembered that they were labelled as heretics by the Inquisitors, asking what their judgment was based on. Dante observed that they were being targeted. Miss Salt mentioned that Nagar Utama was part of Encore, a wing that values experience above all else, which explains why they recruited Herman, a wing remnant, besides the more specific reasons. This caught Dante's attention, and to be honest, mine as well. Why mention that unprompted? He continued to say that humans were made to have experiences and actions appropriate for their worth. That is what they say of it, anyway. Ortiz mentioned that they were told to offer up the severed head of Dante. That means... Then Sinclair had a panic attack, saying that they were back. They didn't forget. Coming back like that to... And he was losing it at this point. Rodia looked at him with pity, but she didn't know what to do. Then Khan alerted Virgilius to the soundbox being noisy, which according to Virgilius meant that the advance team had words for them. It was Effie. There was interference, and it was implied that something had happened to Sod. Gregor then spoke into the radio and asked Effie how things were going over where they were. Then a different voice came from the speaker, saying that they shall bear upon them their every sin and be purified. Ishmael questioned if that was actually Effie's voice, or even if that was human at all. Then Sinclair whistled with an almost deranged look on his face. Roger asked, what he was talking about. He brought attention to the whistles, the ones right at the end. It was faint, but he could pick it up. This surprised Gregor. Then Sinclair shouted that it was her! That wretch was there, after all that time, to destroy the rest of the town. Dante urged him to calm down and asked what he meant by whistles and who that wretched woman was. He said that she was waiting for him, that this was a message calling for him. The tears were full of resentment as he rambles about this. Then Ishmael observed that more Inquisitors were ahead of them. Sinclair advised them to go back, which confused Dante, asking if Sinclair asked if they could head back. He didn't want to go, suggesting that they turn around, tip the steering wheel. Roger was worried about him, asking what was wrong. What was he so worried about walking into? He told them that they shouldn't go. They'll all die. They need to go back. And this is even considering that death is a setback to all of them. Virgilius told him not to be absurd, which was strange as he should understand PTSD better than most, as that's why it took 6 months to get over the destruction of the orphanage, to the point where he was actually functional. Ortiz then decided to flick her wrist and knock him out cold. She replied to their looks, saying that it was a light blow to the stomach that would knock him out cold for a short time. Virgilius had no problem with this, as it saved him having to intervene, which would likely be something far more severe. Ortiz didn't think that they needed cowards on her battlefield, asking if she could throw him off the bus. Dante seeing this as a bit too far, and she deferred to their judgment. Seriously, isn't it obvious that the golden bar in that area is tied to him? And what's happening there is clearly due to something traumatic happening there. Or has happened there, depending on which it is. She was displeased with Sinclair regardless, even knowing that he'll be needed for the mission. As timid as he was, he never opposed something so strongly until now. This bothered Dante. They couldn't ask why, as, Sinclair needed to be conscious to be able to answer. Eventually, Sinclair regained consciousness. He stared out of the window with vacant eyes. Dante told him that the others were all out fighting. Sinclair apologized and decided to go join them. That he can't keep dragging others down. They got off the bus, and they arrived at Kol, which had a Germanic theme to it, although it was also in flames. The smoke that was faintly visible on the way there was covering the whole town. It was coming from the flames that was engulfing it. Ishmael noted the mess it was in. She then asked if anyone heard a familiar song. Heathcliff recognized it as one that was heard an awful lot during snowy days. Gregor mentioned that it was played a bunch during wartime to raise spirits. It had the opposite effect on him. It invoked varying memories with the others. As for Dante, it was definitely familiar, but with no clear images in their head. A faint memory, if anything. Then Dante looked at Sinclair as he remembered that day. It was snowy and that song was playing. Then they observed the trees. They were decorated with grim ornaments. An assortment of internal organs and mechanical parts hung from the branches, as if it was the Addams family decorating for Christmas. This disgusted Roger. Ryosho considered this a classic, but more kitschy than anything. Thank you, Wednesday Addams. Then Masot observed that there were no survivors nearby. Then everything fell into place. It was just like... Then Dante was interrupted by a loudspeaker sounding with the piercing sound that caused the group to cover their ears. And she was asking if they were enjoying their Noel. It wasn't silent, but it was certainly holy. Then Dante asked if Christmas was a fair way off. 10 months from that time as far as I'm concerned. Ishmael agreed that it wasn't any time soon. That voice then announced herself as Chroma, a humanitarian who loves purity and the one who grips the hammer. She didn't know how they got there, but they're trespassing on private property. Last time I checked, you're on K-Corp turf, not N-Corp. She then went on about that hallowed ground undergoing their nailing judgments, hoping that they like the decorations that she set up. She's saying that if they admit they got lost and turn back now, then a fine is all they'd have to pay. She was feeling generous as today was the nativity. She is clearly insane. Quite insane. She then asked if Guido was there. An imposing man with a metal mask and a giant nail was stabbing one of the former inhabitants of Kar, saying that here he stood. Which assured Chroma, asking if there were any heretics there. He looked around and then gazed at Dante, and this froze them completely still, even though Guido was masked. He saw Dante as an impure one, and the others as their followers. That's a stretch, as they only listen to them when it suits them. And one of the followers is that child that she spoke of. This excited Chroma, saying that her Sinclair was back, inviting him to come see her at the familiar spot. Instead of terror, Sinclair was overcome by rage, which made it difficult for him to make coherent sentences, although Dante was unsure if it was hatred or fear that was Sinclair's reaction. Chroma then ordered Guido to take out the rest, or should she do so herself? She wouldn't mind. Then Guido urged her to focus on hammering the impure. She laughed manically at this. They should keep up with the purification. Seriously, she's basically gender-bent Joker at this point. Similar insanity. Anyway, then she told them Merry Christmas. Then Guido and a number of Inquisitors gathered around, not moving but being threatening. They were out for their blood, and they attacked the damned dozen. After a tough battle, they were able to kill the Inquisitors and incapacitate Guido. Ishmael remarking on how tough he was, and that they should move on before he comes back to his senses. Or it is considered as shameful. A soldier doesn't retreat before their enemy when victory is in sight. Ishmael was annoyed by Ortiz, telling her to save the military speak for a better time. Dante agreed with Ishmael, as this was a battle that they were incapable of winning against. At least not easily. Ortiz deferred to their judgment. Then Dante asked Sinclair what Chroma meant by that familiar spot. Sinclair's dread was making it difficult for him to speak, although his anger was starting to override his fear. Dante then said that he needed to talk. If he told them what he knew, he'll prevent half the deaths that they might suffer. Ortiz added that it will also raise the likelihood of success. She's looking forward to hearing some useful intel. Dante was hoping that this was the right thing to do. Sinclair gathered himself and then finally spoke of what was needed, that Chroma must be at his house. Heathcliff asked if he knew that bird. His head was still pounding thanks to her shrill laugh. Apparently Sinclair met her, he met her at school. Roger believed her to be a friend of his, hoping that he can talk it out with her. Please tell me you're joking. Diplomacy failed with the grunts, so I doubt it will be much better with someone that would be a perfect match for Argalia the Blue Sicko. Sinclair denied that she was a friend, as Cromer killed his family. And yes, Rudyard realised how much of that was bad taste. Then one of the prosthetic heads that was hanging even from the tree, was slowly turning to face them. It recognised Sinclair, asking, why did he return? Rudyard asking if they were Sinclair's neighbours. Well, it looks like that to him. He hoped that wasn't the case. He had a grim look on his face as the wires sparked and short-circuited. Then the head started singing Silent Night, regardless of when this was. It was actually quite disturbing, especially as the other heads were singing this. Ishmael understood what the definition of heresy was to those zealots. It was prosthetic body parts. Prostheses aren't new in the city. Well, certainly not according to Faust. But many found it foreign and alienating, with Roland mentioning that some see them as the defiled. Sinclair continued to say that their town was called the holy site of Neskay's prosthetic industry. Most of the residents worked in manufacturing high-end prosthetic components. Cromer had been eyeing their town for a long time. Gregor asked about his family, and Sinclair confirmed his suspicions that his father was the owner of a fledgling prosthetics company as well, asking if it, but couldn't complete that last part as Ishmael interrupted him, saying no, as attributing it to a high-flown cause of any kind is giving them too much credit. She sees them for what they are, lunatics consumed by madness and violence. Yeah, and that's who's in charge of that organization. I'd hate to think what the board members of NCorp are like. After a while of staring at the Christmas trees decorated with his neighbours, Sinclair turned to Dante. He had a question for them. They let him ask it. Sinclair then asked how it felt. Dante was unsure what he meant. Sinclair made it clear that he was referring to how it would feel to have a prosthetic replacement for their head. Dante was taken aback by this, as none had asked this before. They didn't know how they ended up with a clock for a head, so Dante didn't know how to answer. Sinclair wasn't trying to argue with them, apologising for his rudeness. Dante didn't take it personally, as the others were much ruder to them on a daily basis. By this standard, this is positively friendly. Dante told him that they can't answer that, as they didn't remember a thing about their life before receiving that head. Sinclair wondered what it felt like, as there was something sitting where the head used to be. His family said it was no different than wearing a hat or a watch. He couldn't picture it well, no matter how he approached it. And now he's the only survivor. Thanks to that. Dante said that the procedure seemed terrifying at a young age. That he didn't have to feel guilty about that. Sinclair disputed that, as it's nothing like that, saying that he's not as innocent as Dante might think. Dante couldn't find the right words after that. Yeah, we're going to find out where all that repressed emotion came from at the casino, aren't we? They continued to search Coral for Sinclair's house, and the burning town had yet to reveal all of its horrors. They saw prosthetic bodies piling up like a landfill in the corner of the town. Some were still conscious, letting out pained moans. The Inquisitors didn't give a They jammed the nails through each of the victims' chests over and over, executing their pure intent. Liars? They made Ryoshu's bloodlust seem innocent. Then we have a conversation between two Inquisitors where one spoke of piercing their heart, yet still a pulse remained in their body. The other spoke of it being patched with steel. Even the core of their humanity has been tainted with heresy. Considering it filthy, a disgrace to flesh and bone, they then poured a bottle of liquid over the body, in what appears to be a solemn ritual. Yeah. One to cloak their bloodlust and insanity. Yes, like the holy oil. Then that Inquisitor said to the body, "Imbibe the oil of humanity, ye heretical Soma. Those who cannot return to the earth find solace in scattering the smoke." Then they threw a match over the body, burning it. Okay, I might have pyromaniac tendencies, but this is not okay to me, especially as it left an acrid smell. Not quite like the smell of burning flesh, and it caused the one inside it to be killed. Ishmael was disgusted by this, seeing this hellscape for what it was. If that was their idea of purification, she'd rather stay unclean. Miss Salt then mentioned that Nagel und Hammer has always been devoted to scrutinizing the idea of humanity. Some criticized prosthetic use. Yes, prosthetic use. As they believe more or less what Arthur Schopenhauer had said, that life without pain has no meaning. Pain being a necessity to human experience. This has only recently escalated to the direct action that they're witnessing. Gregor then asks a good question at this point. How the does Nussalt know so much about Encore? It turned out that let's just say that the intro image of him reveals what he now confirms. He was once employed by Encore. Well, that explains a lot. Gregor asked if he used to work with those people. He's never worked with the fanatical mass murderers that they're fighting now, but he was affiliated with Encore. Dante noted that this was the first time that he actively talked about himself. He rarely spoke about anything related to himself and didn't see it as necessary to speak unless ordered to. Gregor asked, why didn't he tell them? Does he carry one of those freaky weapons? Messalt asked if he was obliged to elaborate. Heathcliff asked him to explain what makes him different from those nutters, because as much as he call his daft manager Clockface, he doesn't think that they deserve by any means to be put on the stake or chopping block. Now this is a surprise. Heathcliff saying something positive about Dante. Hell has a new ski resort because of this. Then he spoke of how they talk big about purifying and all that, but all he sees are a bunch of loonies. He just needs an excuse to kill. Okay, this isn't a universe where Heathcliff is the voice of reason and Ishmael is the one with the anger management problem. This is our Heathcliff saying this. Then he asked if he was like those Screwley's bucketheads. Heathcliff, that's being too generous, as that implies that only one screw is loose. With them, a Swedish flat-pack self-assembly kit has fallen apart due to shoddy construction on the buyer's part. Apparently there was a time when Missalt thought about such things, but he didn't come to a conclusion. Heathcliff wanted a conclusion now. Would he be up for butchering all the townsfolk if Dante just said so? Missalt asks if he must give an answer, as this doesn't help with handling their work. An employee must follow their employer's orders. The terms Virgilius presented stated that much. If Dante ordered him to do that, he'd do that. He'll provide his input if he's told it's necessary, but he doesn't ramble his thoughts unprompted. Although, I doubt that if he was told to do indecent things to innocents by Dante, he'd do that, as even for him there is such a thing as going too far. This only served to increase Heathcliff's anger, asking if he's round the twist. Does he have a chunk of metal for his brains like they do? Miss Salt's response makes me think that he's not only a functional psychopath, but also has some form of autism, as he gave an answer with too much detail for it to be not the case. Stating that he is 16% proteins, 60% water, 7% minerals, and so forth. Different in terms of composition, unnecessary heavy metals don't compromise any portion of his body. Heathcliff's face was contorted with frustration after this conversation. The enigma that was Miss Salt felt even more distant. Honglu then was wondering. He was thinking on whether Dante should be seen as human. Ortis then asked what he meant by that. He went on to say that it might be the clock and not Dante that's behind the words. This confused Heathcliff, as he was asking if this meant that he was being led by an actual clock. Ishmael saw this as reaching uncharted depths of idiocy with their theories. She couldn't even be bothered to refute them. Honglu then, he didn't want them to misunderstand, as he liked the head of Dante. Roger suggested that they give up on finding their old head and stick with that one, asking what if their old head was super evil. Gregor understood that only one of them would know of Dante's past, all looking at Faust. She mentioned that it was confidential information, access restricted to highest security level, which of course Dante doesn't have clearance for. How convenient. This made them question if they really were clock. Asking Faust was pointless, as she wouldn't tell them, even suspecting that there's some advanced imitation. Which I doubt, as the head would be on their case if it turns out that they're an AI. They might mount their head on the wall when they find the real head of theirs. Ishmael did not approve of that, but she decided not to speak of what she was thinking. Then Ishmael asked what to do now, advising that they move quietly so that they might be able to pass by the other Inquisitors unnoticed. Sinclair appears to have other ideas, as he apologized to Dante in advance, as he's not as experienced with fighting compared to the others. Their foes might jab him in the heart over and over for that, asking Dante if they will bear that for him. The fear was obvious due to the trembling, but his conviction was enough to override that just enough to function, even if it looks pitiful for everyone to witness. It's not the first time he's died. Probably won't be the last either. Dante would bring him back. Today, however, he was asking for Dante's understanding, determined to confront them directly, even if it kills him again and again. Which is unlike the fright that a usual battle invokes, the kind of fear that comes with a certain courage. Dante asked if Sinclair was scared. This startled Sinclair. Dante asked if they said something weird. Sinclair was reminded of a friend that asked the same question. Then his voice cracked as he agreed with what Heathcliff said. They're the same person regardless of what head they have on. The same could be said about his family, implying that they've had their bodies replaced with prosthetics. Or at least partially. Dante thanked him. Sinclair then mentions that he can't be too thankful when he's about to make them suffer by throwing his life away. Dante forgot to ask who asked that same question as they and the others charged into battle. The insanity is revealed, and not all of this is clear just yet. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!